So when you look at this glass, is the glass half full or is the glass half empty? Are you an optimist or a pessimist? Maybe you've come to the realization yourself about which one you are, or maybe you've been labeled as one or the other by someone else and it's stuck with you your whole life. The idea, of course, is that we can use these two categories to explain what is our outlook on life, whether we approach things with the understanding that things will turn out well, or we tend to think that things might go a little bit more poorly. Well, whichever outlook you have, or believe you have, I'm inviting you this morning to set that aside, and we're going to delve into something a little different that might help us to understand our perspective on life in a way that is a little bit more nuanced. During this season of creation, we've been learning a bit about creation spirituality, which is a facet of Christianity that became popular in the 1980s. We see elements of it in our own United Church statements of faith, and it has influenced other denominations as well. Today's lesson from creation spirituality is that we go through 4 specific seasons or paths of life at different times and at different rates. And those 4 seasons will provide us a framework for how we might understand how God is working in the world and in our own lives. So let's jump in, shall we? As we go through these 4 seasons, I invite you to consider which one you might be in right now. And think of the times when you have lived within the other seasons as well. Where did you see God in each season? So the first one is perhaps the easiest to explain and understand. It's the season of positivity or of awe and wonder. These are the times of life when we feel that things are going well, that we feel blessed and at peace with ourselves, with God, and with the world. We are able to identify moments of awe and wonder, and we are filled with gratitude for the gifts we have been given. We experience joy, and we notice it, and we don't take it for granted. The second season is also easy to explain, but maybe not so easy to appreciate. It's the season of negativity, or of letting go. It is that place of confusion and discombobulation that happens when we experience loss, endings, and death. It is also the wrestling that happens during that dark night of the soul when unresolved pain bubbles up from our past. We've all lived through these experiences in life, but sometimes we try to avoid the stress and pain of it all by pushing those feelings down or living in denial about what's really happening. Living into this season in a healthy spiritual way means allowing those negative experiences in our lives to just be what they are instead of ignoring or denying them. It means being aware of our pain and suffering and giving ourselves the time and space we need to move through it. We know that grief and anger and sadness don't last forever. And as Christians, we know that God is there with us in our suffering. This is not an easy season to be in, but if we are able to recognize God's presence and the gifts of comfort and grace within it all, we will find that we move through the hard stuff with a more peaceful spirit. The third season is the place of breakthrough and new birth. It is the season of creativity, the one where we harness our energies and use our gifts to co-create with God. Sometimes this means doing things that we would typically consider creative, things like painting and the arts, quilting, theater, writing, or music. But for those of us who don't feel like we are that creative, I've got good news. God calls us to be creative in all kinds of ways. Raising children and grandchildren, teaching, gardening, running a business or a farm, constructing houses, comforting a friend or coworker in distress, working in medicine or science. Any way that we can use our imagination to create something new, any task that brings us fulfillment or allows us to contribute something to the universe. brings us into this season of creativity. The fourth and final season is that of transformation. It is the times in our lives when we are acting like prophets. And this is another area where you might say to yourself, I don't feel like I'm that prophetic. But the biblical explanation of the word prophet means that you look at the way things are and you say, this isn't good enough. We can do better. This isn't what God's kingdom is supposed to look like. And then you work to make that a reality. It means we say no to injustice and we celebrate healing and justice. This is another area where there is such a wide variety of attitudes and activities that fit into this season. You might be volunteering or donating to the Friendship Inn or the food bank, teaching your kids and grandkids about compassion for others, and standing up for what is right. You might be signing up voters or working to protect democracy, campaigning for animal rights, talking to others about ending racism, helping kids learn to read. There are so many things that we could be doing to bring about transformation in this world that so badly needs it. And so those are the four paths or seasons: awe and wonder, letting go, creativity, and transformation. They do not exist in any particular order, and we can circle through them multiple times in a day, a week, or a year. We can dwell in more than one season at a time. This simply gives us a framework to think about where is God in our lives and where we might be at any given moment. And rather than the optimist-pessimist dichotomy, this concept allows us to hold conflicting or opposing situations together. Instead of that pressure to always be happy or stick to the personality we've been given, we are able to dwell in the moment and allow whatever is happening to just happen. Although these four seasons aren't specifically based on our reading today from Ecclesiastes, they draw from the same idea, that things happen in their own good time, and God is there as part of it. We've talked before about how the phrase, everything happens for a reason, is actually quite harmful. It places blame on people when bad things happen to them, and suggests that they deserve it or earned it somehow. But if we understand instead that everything has a time rather than a reason, then there's no heavenly accounting system that tallies up rewards and punishments and doles them out. There's just God's presence, there with us in the midst of whatever is happening in our world. The holy, right there with us, in the good and the bad and the in-between. And that gives us the freedom to experience life, to be present in the moment, free of judgment or fear, and grounded instead in God. Kate Bowler is an author and professor who wrote an incredible book called Everything Happens for a Reason and Other Lies I've Loved. It's a reflection on how her faith changed when she received a cancer diagnosis in her early 30s. I love Kate, and I've talked about her here before. She also hosts a beautiful online community through Instagram videos and podcasts. And one of the things she mentions all the time that I've really taken to heart is how there are these crazy paradoxes that happen within life, but that we can learn to live within them. Kate writes, I can't reconcile the way that the world is jolted by events that are wonderful and terrible, the gorgeous and the tragic, except that I'm beginning to believe that these opposites do not cancel each other out. I see a middle-aged woman in the waiting room of the cancer clinic, her arms wrapped around the frail frame of her son. She squeezes him tightly, oblivious to the way he looks down at her sheepishly. He laughs after a moment, a hostage to her impervious love. Joy persists somehow, and I soak it in. The horror of cancer has made everything seem like it is painted in bright colors. I think the same thoughts again and again. Life is so beautiful. Life is so hard. Kate comes back to this phrase again and again, especially as she lives with her cancer diagnosis and surgeries and treatments and dealing with getting insurance to cover all of her care, while at the same time being loved so deeply and so tangibly by her family and friends and colleagues and even strangers. Life is so beautiful. Life is so hard. And always, always, God is in it with us. The idea of having these different seasons that we go through allows us to hold together the contradiction of completely opposite feelings or situations, instead of having to fake our way through and pretend that everything is all right. We can be grieving a loss, but also find something to laugh at. We can be angry at the injustice in the world and also grateful for creation's beauty. We can be discouraged about our job or our role in the family at the moment, but also find moments of peace and joy in the work that we do. Life is so beautiful. Life is so hard. That's what creation spirituality and the writer of Ecclesiastes have offered to us as well. There is a time to weep and a time to laugh. There is a time to mourn and a time to dance. Sometimes those happen simultaneously, and our invitation is to step into the moment, open our hearts to the experience, and simply ask ourselves, where is God in this? Amen.